Thank you, David, and my thanks to the foundation, Glenn, for inviting me here, and new friendships with Brian and Bernie and others. First of all, thanks for staying and even facing here after discussions of confit and baguettes and vinaigrettes. I'm surprised you're not all at the back table here, so thanks for sticking around. Wonderful for me to come here. I come from a place where our very first settlers were from the South, and not just anywhere in the South. They were from South Carolina. And so I grew up hearing names in our vicinity that this trip has given me a chance to connect with again, and I'm deeply grateful for it. I'll move quickly also through the slides I have to share with you. Everything is available here publicly. Happy to share anything if you seek more information, to be in further email touch with you. And again, just what a delight to have these few minutes to share. You know what land races are, and some of these, David, I'm violating every pedagogical principle of PowerPoints here because I know this is a dense slide, but we have some squishy definitions in our work. And heritage and heirloom are certainly one of those. According to the USDA, I think everything up to 1950 is actually a heritage variety. But land races are those uniquely before 1890s that were non-hybridized, and so this is, as I say, grains the way God made them, coming from the German term Land and race, because these had adapted over many thousands of years to places all around the world. There were thousands of land races. They were known to people in all cultures, east and west. Of course, no small cereals like wheat and barley here prior to the arrival of the Spanish in the early 16th century. But as you can see, even from poetry and early modern times, late medieval, there was an awareness that there are many different kinds. They had different flavor profiles. They have different stories. And it's fascinating for me as a historian and one interested in place-based studies and folklore to see how they became connected with various places here in the United States and in Canada. A very peculiar convergence took place for me that connects with a part of the reason why I'm here. And again, had it not been for the great work spearheaded by David and Glenn and others, it might not have made this connection. I was hosting a group of teachers about 5 years ago for a workshop at a place called Fort Nisqually, maybe not known to most of you. It's one of the few places in the Northwest that really is a site of original Hudson's Bay era fur trade period architecture from the early 1800s. We have other famous places, Fort Vancouver, Fort Colville, and others. Most of them are kind of fake Potemkin villages, but good work going on there. But at Fort Nisqually, not only the buildings, but also the records are kept, original materials, and after setting up some materials for the workshop, the education officer said, hey, we have some interesting things upstairs. And apparently, we had spoken about our mutual interest in Western history. So I started looking through a few journals. None of us can go to an archive or library without seeing what's around. And found recurrent references, just in a 10 or 15-minute look at those journals, to white wheat and red wheat and yellow wheat and all kinds of things. And I said to this fellow, I thought this was a fur trading post. These are documents from the 1820s. And he said, well, yes, but we were told by the governor of the Hudson's Bay Company early in the 19th century it was time for us to become self-reliant. Trade your traps in for plows. It wasn't real popular with everybody, but that's a long way to send provisions. And so in this image actually shows Sir George Simpson in the middle in the top hat. He's got a keg of grain with him. And this grain we know now, after considerable detective work of things that we all like doing, was the white, soft winter Lammas May wheat, which continued to be grown out in the Oregon country throughout the 1800s. It was a good yielder, good miller, and was raised even into, well into the early 20th century. Fortunately, the USDA sent out, by the way, I'd love this on my business card, I don't have it, but people like Mark Carlton and others, maybe here even at this institution, had the formal title of Plant Explorer. And a plant explorer made his way to the Oregon country, Willamette Valley, fertile area in the early 1900s, about 1912. He happened upon a field between Portland and Eugene, Oregon, where the white May grain was still being raised. And he took a sample and sent it to what was then, of course, our germplasm center, Beltsville, I think Beltsville, Maryland, where it remained until those were divided up middle of the 20th century and made its way sort of back to the Northwest, where today, as many of you know, the USDA's small cereal grains germplasm center is in Aberdeen, Oregon. And so through a long story here that I won't go into, we were finally able to locate it. Started with small samples, thanks to the good folks like Brian and others that work in institutions like this. And so this is our fourth year of growing it out, and was happy to share with Glenn, David, and others here, so we can bring it back home, if you will. I stand in awe at your presence here and the work you've committed yourselves to, because the realm of sustainability and doing the right thing holds promise for making our world a better place, and that's why I'm here. I work with young people all the time. I work in teacher training, work in South Seattle, and volunteer with places like Seattle Urban Academy, where a lot of kids in that part of our city don't grow up with a lot of hope. And I like sharing with them there's new possibilities. By the way, I didn't go into that slide, but part of the sad story here is what some of our conventional approaches of growing have done to the degradation of the environment. Here are some of the dead zones in the mouths of our great world river systems. And I have become quite interested in finding with you other ways to do things through restorative agriculture that can not only promote environmental responsibility, but give us the added benefit of these kinds of restored culinary traditions that help celebrate heritage and flavor and traditions in ways that attach meaning to people's lives of all ages. Here I am in an old busted down combine. By the way, Brian, you don't know how good this did my heart, our little tour this morning you gave us, seeing a few less than new Alice Chalmers combines out there. I hope yours stay together longer than ours do. This is a field of Abyssinian hulless barley. My ancestors came from South Russia. They were those who, over 100 years ago, brought varieties like Turkey Red to the United States. They actually raised hulless-colored barleys from Ethiopia and Egypt. They did well on the dry regions that were from what is today the lower Volga, Saratov-Ingles area, east to the Aral Sea in Kazakhstan. A lot of similarity in environments, and they found that some of these dryland grains flourished in those areas. And so we've been interested in seeking to restore them not only abroad, but also here in regions of the United States where they flourished over a century ago. So these are all goals of our nascent efforts with, I guess I would say, some kind of sister affiliates with what you're doing in spirit in the Pacific Northwest. And some of you may have known of Dr. Steve Jones, who's our senior wheat breeder with Washington State University, who has really pioneered efforts in these areas and has been a great influence in many of our lives. I frankly probably wouldn't have known of what's happening at the germplasm centers had it not been for a chance meeting with him in the early 1990s. There's great relevance to what we're all about for the 21st centuries in ways I didn't know when I first got into this. I was interested as a historian. I was interested as a folklorist. But there's very practical applied reasons that we should be about what we are. And in this case, David mentioned I do have great interest in working with our Native American communities in the Pacific Northwest and have pursued that for many years. This is restoration of land-raised oats and also Sonora grains, the original Indian flatbread flour. And so we have worked with the Colville Indian Nation in north central Washington to revive that culture, and just quite oddly learned a couple of years ago of an oat landrace that was raised in upper Midwest and perhaps out here also, Lincoln oats, that led to interest in the White House initiative to provide more nutritional lunch programs for our students all across the country, supported by Michelle Obama and others who have shown great leadership in this work. And so we were delighted to share that with young people in Washington, D.C. and beyond. Here is Turkey. I'd like to say that these grains our people brought from southeastern Europe endured in the Northwest until recent times, but they actually fell into disuse long before World War II. But thanks again to like-minded people doing similar work to maintain these populations in the Midwest, where my ancestors first settled before continuing west, we were also able to obtain them and begin raising those out. This is a look at French Tussala, which is a first cousin of the white May wheat that I've been very interested in, because this is one of the few things that my wife allows me in the kitchen to undertake. I'm the pancake guy. I'm the crepe guy in our family. And I happen to ask the folks that market some of these products around the country about where they're getting their grain, and the few that knew did not attest to any of it being authentic. I think we have a chance to really raise the bar with some of the efforts like you're championing here. Glenn, I call this slide Amy's Serious Hutch. And Amy Halloran, a great friend of ours, America's Pancake Queen, is working hard with us to introduce grains like white May to pancake makers across the country. Sonora, I told you, is the original Indian flatbread grain, came up through on the El Camino Real, was in Southern California, we know, as early as the mid-1600s, and was grown up in the Oregon country by the mid-1800s, probably the second oldest grain in the Pacific Northwest. Well, what are some of the applied practical reasons for this work? Here's a slide that also, I'm sorry, violates every rule of PowerPoint, but I wanted to point this out to you because the folks at LNARP, which is kind of a European counterpart of USDA, have done extensive looks at the nutritive values of land-raised grains, early hybrids, modern hybrids, primitive pre-wheats, the Immers, Eichhorns, Spelt. And without looking at all the numbers here and digest things in our short time, I will bring this to your attention. I highlighted in red the highest nutritive values of all the categories, from magnesium to iron, potassium, boron, others. And it's interesting that when you look at the spread, you'll see that every highest category is associated with a pre-hybridized grain. This was analysis, I believe, of 264 varieties done recently by LNARP in Europe. A real confirmation that not only are we on to flavor, but we're on to nutrition. Of course, these have implications also for brewers, and this is taking off in the Northwest perhaps here too. I honestly don't know how many craft brewers we had 20 years ago in Washington and Oregon. My guess is it was probably fewer than 30. Today, there are almost 300 in Washington, almost 300 in Oregon. And so the malting barleys and soft and particularly the soft red wheats like Red Russian, which is actually an English squarehead, on blind test after blind test are greatly impressing those that are deeply involved in the Northwest microbrewery effort. And so it's been quite fun. Marrying high-tech unimalting systems that are in that building on the right with the very old world approaches to reviving these grains. So these are areas that have been my great interest, and I appreciate your work that you're pioneering here to make this happen. I am entirely without portfolio to ever write a word about the appearance of heritage approaches and grains in the great themes of Western art and literature. But after 100,000 words writing about this, I've decided it's time to put the cursor down or the pen or whatever. Nobody's ever going to read this thing. But this is my latest attempt to try to make sense of these things. This is a painting from the Tretyakov Gallery in Moscow. My father would probably cringe at seeing that great big thistle there on the left-hand side, but all of us working in organic efforts, you got to put up with some of this. But boy, if ever I saw an image that could sing, this is it. I love it. I've got butterflies in this picture. I've got the senior reaper leading his family. These are all the good things that we ought to be about: family, flavor, taste, hard work, celebrating the great new day that lies ahead. Thank you for the chance to share, and appreciate again being here. Thank you.